the North Coast 500, Scotland's greatest road trip, taking in some iconic places and some of our best scenery. But how long do you really need? Is it a 7-day thing? Or could you shoehorn the whole trip into a couple of days? Could you do it in a weekend? That sounds like a challenge. Welcome to Scotland Unplugged, and a very hasty North Coast 500. I have got a bit of a confession to make. I run a channel about Scotland, but I really don't think I've seen enough of it. There's just so much more I need to see. And driving around the north of the country does seem like a good way to put that right. Modern tradition dictates that you should probably roar around the route in a supercar or hire a camper van, and that the VW is almost definitely the daddy. I've gone with the compact version. It does mean I won't be able to sleep in it, but I'm prepared to make that sacrifice. Morning. So it is about 7:15 AM in Inverness. I came up here last night, about a 3-hour drive, stayed at the Marriott Hotel. If I was a trendy travel influencer, which as you can see from the state of me, I'm obviously not, I would say it was pretty good. I'm not normally a breakfast guy, but I kind of went for it this morning. Needs must. My wife says I'm going to have to be pretty disciplined, and she's right, because I do tend to hang around to try and get the best shots I possibly can. But there isn't time for this on this trip, so let's crack on. I started out on the east coast. My plan was to go in an anti-clockwise direction. I drove past Strathpeffer and the Black Isle, and out along the A9. Everything I've read so far and seen so far about the North Coast 500 says that the East Coast is the really boring bit. I'm not bored yet. I thought I'd chance my arm and see if Dunrobin Castle was open, but like it said when I looked it up, it wasn't. So I carried on, watching the landscape and the place names change as I headed north into what could almost be another country. This is Wholigo Haven, and those are the Wholigo Steps. There were originally 365 of them. I'm not too sure how many there are now. I've been too distracted by my fear of heights to count them. The name Wholigo comes from the whales that used to be beached here. Later on, with the boom in the herring industry in this part of the world, they needed somewhere to service the industry. The famous engineer Thomas Telfer did have a look at the site, but decided it just wasn't worth it. Luckily, someone else decided to prove him wrong. The steps were built by a Captain David Brodie for the crazy sum of £8. That's about £527 in today's money. Bargain. Billy Connolly came here as part of his World Tour of Scotland in 1994. During a storm, he told the story of the fishwives who used to race each other up the steps with their baskets of herring. Jack Vetriano later painted it, and it's now on the side of a building in Glasgow. This place is crazy. The only problem is, now I've got to go back up them. Next up, it was time for the obligatory castle, and I like the look of this one. Even if it is a bit out of the way, up a single track road, past some World War II buildings next to a lighthouse. This is Castle Sinclair Gurnigo. It's actually two castles, Castle Sinclair and Castle Gurnigo. Castle Sinclair was probably built sometime at the end of the 14th century, with Castle Gurnigo added at the beginning of the 17th century. As the name suggests, it was a seat of Clan Sinclair. In 1577, George Sinclair, the 4th Earl of Caithness, imprisoned his own son, John Sinclair, the Master of Caithness, here for 7 years. Apparently he'd been disobedient in some way or other. The story goes that after 7 years, George fed him on a diet of salt beef with no water, till slowly John went mad and eventually expired. Which sounds pretty grim. These days, the castle's owned by a trust, and it's currently off limits because it needs a lot of work. I couldn't hang around forever. I had to steel myself for Tourist Mageddon. John O'Groats is pretty famous, and I knew it would be really busy. Until it got there, and it wasn't. It takes its strange name from a 15th century Dutchman, Jan de Groot. Jan ran a ferry to the Orkney Isles and charged people 2 pence for the trip, a coin denomination that later became known as a groat. He also had 7 sons who argued over who was the most important, and to solve the problem he's said to have built an 8-sided house with 8 doors, one for himself and each of his sons, along with an 8-sided table, so no one could sit at the head. There's quite a lot going on here. I'm not sure what I expected to see at John O'Groats, but that behind me is not it. You can actually see the Orkney Islands from here. They're only 8 miles away, according to the signpost that everybody turns up and gets a selfie at. The sign is so famous, there's even a sign for the sign. What I definitely wasn't expecting to see was a Christmas shop. Contrary to kind of popular culture or popular belief, John O'Groats is not the most northerly point in mainland Britain. It's not even the furthest away point from Land's End, although races traditionally go from Land's End to John O'Groats. Actually, the furthest north point is over there. This is Dunnet Head, home of another lighthouse, more wartime remains, and some amazing views. And yes, Orkney's even closer. So if you ever wondered, can you literally fall off the end of Scotland? Yes you can. Now I was well and truly on the north coast. We'd gone from the extreme flat of the extreme northeast to the winding coastal roads and some full-on beaches. I drove on hoping to get to Smoo Cave, but that was always going to be a long shot. So eventually I settled for taking in the scenery and heading for our overnight spot. Glamping is a bit of a first for me. So, day 2. Last night I stayed in Achmelwick. Good luck pronouncing that if you're not from around here. So I tried to get to Smoo Cave. So Smoo Cave is kind of a natural wonder of the North Coast 500, if you like. Unfortunately, I couldn't actually get into it because it was too dark. I could have probably got down there, but you wouldn't have seen very much. So that's not ideal. I did miss some of the scenery coming down the west, so I'm going to head back up this morning and see the Kylesku Bridge. But I couldn't go anywhere without taking a look at my surroundings first. This is the Hermit's Castle, designed by the English architect David Scott in the 1950s and made from concrete. It's called the Hermit's Castle because of the idea that hermits were bricked into their cells and fed through a small hole. The entrance is a bit tight and a bit precarious. Some people apparently still use it as a bothy. I think I'll stick with the glamping for now. Apparently it bears the distinction of being the smallest castle in the world. I'm not entirely convinced it counts, but we'll go with it. Fiona seems to love it though. Just round the corner, you'll find Achmelwick Bay. I've never actually been to the Caribbean, but I can't help imagining that's what the sea looks like. Maybe not the moody sky. Pristine white sands, turquoise water. I could have stayed here for a while, but I had stuff to see. Which, first of all, involved a 20-mile drive in the wrong direction. This is the famous Kylesku Bridge. I think I'm pronouncing that properly. It actually has a new name now. It's been christened with a Gaelic name, which I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce. I couldn't come down the North Coast 500 and not come here, so I've kind of doubled back on myself. The bridge itself was actually built in 1984, which is a bit further back than I would have thought, given that anytime you Google a picture of the North Coast 500, which is a fairly recent thing, that's invariably one of the images you get. It's iconic, emblematic of the North Coast 500 itself. The reason for the curvy shape is to minimise the impact on its environment. The entrance and the exit go with the flow of the landscape, creating something a wee bit more organic, even if it is made from concrete. Now I was facing in the right direction again. I drove south, through the rain and the kaleidoscopic landscapes, on my way to a date with my favourite phobia. This is Corrie Gorge. It's about a mile long, but more to the point, it's quite a long way down. Regular viewers of this channel will know that I have fairly mixed feelings about that kind of thing. The Victorian suspension bridge likes to move from side to side as you cross it, just to keep things spicy. A long way down. It was built by Sir John Fowler, chief engineer on the Forth Bridge and the world's first underground railway, the Metropolitan line in London. So I think we're in fairly safe hands. John Fowler owned this estate and planted 9 million trees in his time here. Not single-handedly. Now the route took me west, round past Gairloch and on towards Benay and Lochmarie, and views that just kept getting bigger. Genuinely staggered. I've lived here all my life and I've never really seen scenery like this. I think I need to get out more. I could have hung around here too, but I had to go in search of a local celebrity. This is Callum. Callum the Stag has become a bit of a star on social media, turning up regularly at the windows of snap-happy tourists. He likes to hang out in the car park at Benay. Benay is the country's oldest nature reserve, created in 1951. Now the clock was really ticking. I was rapidly running out of batteries, storage and daylight, and there was one thing I really wanted to see. So I wound my way around the Applecross Peninsula, with pretty much everything crossed. This is what I've really been looking forward to. This is the Ballach na Ba, the Pass of the Cattle, the UK's fastest climbing road, rising 2,054 feet from sea level over the 3.7 mile road from Applecross. It was constructed in 1822, and as the name suggests, it's an old route used by cattle drovers. From the top you can see right across the Skye and the Applecross Peninsula. But with the light fading, all that was left to do was drive and enjoy the view. And from there, it was just a trifling matter of the 4.5 hour drive home. So, can you do the North Coast 500 in a weekend? Yes, but should you? No. Unless you're the kind of daft country bumpkin who loves driving on twisty roads and getting lost in that kind of experience. Probably not. Obviously, I loved it, but there are things I'd like to have seen more of. Local food I'd like to have eaten more of, but I was in a hurry, and I was filming. So if you're not filming and you have limited time, say a long weekend, it's worth a go. You don't have to stick to the exact route. This was quite a trip. It's one that in hopefully 40 years' time, when Scotland Unplugged is a dim and distant memory, I'd say I'll look back on. If you're not in as much of a hurry as I was, clear a bit more space in your schedule. This is one for the bucket list.